YouTube, welcome back to the channel. You're watching Gunplay TV, and today, as we'll see, right, we're not on the tabletop. We have no firearms out at the moment, and that's because I wanted to take a moment to instead discuss some of the recent events that have been taking place here in the nation. Now, I'm not going to get too political. However, if you're not living under a rock, you're probably aware of the fact that we had a large wireless network outage this past week. Now, that of course affected the likes of AT&T. I think some Verizon customers also were affected, probably due to just the nature of sharing infrastructure in this day and age. But all that being said, right, that was a major outage. Now, there's been a lot of conjecture at the moment as to whether or not this may or may not have been a natural event, right? Was this a solar flare, a coronal mass ejection, something of the sort, right? Now, again, I'm no scientist, I'm no Neil deGrasse Tyson. However, I do know a small amount about these type of events, right? And the long and short of it is, I don't think that's what we were affected by. One, the United States was facing away from the sun at the time of the outage, so naturally we would not have been affected, at least to the extent of my knowledge. Beyond that, right, again, I think it's more likely that we suffered something of a cyber attack, right? A targeted attack of opportunity. And so what I wanted to discuss today is not who was behind it, why did it happen, etc. But instead, I did want to discuss some of the things that we can do as free, independent citizens, kind of separate from the developed architecture and infrastructure that we've got in our country to protect our sensitive electronics that otherwise could be damaged in an EMP, solar flare, coronal mass ejection, so on and so forth, right? So with all that said, right, we saw, again, a major outage, and that affected primarily the cell networks. Now, I am an AT&T customer for both wireless and home internet. And I can say that, well, my wireless coverage was affected, my home internet was not. And so, again, frankly, that takes away some of the credence, I think, to the EMP or solar flare theory, because I have to imagine something like that would have been more indiscriminate, and it's affecting a wide slew of other devices, right? Vehicles, smaller electronics, et cetera, right? So as far as I'm concerned, most likely probably a targeted attack of opportunity, just to kind of sow some discord here in the nation potentially, right? And who did that, why, is certainly beyond my pay grade. However, I would say that we did dodge something of a small bullet, in the sense that our day-to-day electronics, our cell phones, etc., were not fried entirely, despite their inability to connect to the wireless cell towers, right? So that's a whole infrastructure discussion, kind of auxiliary to what we're talking about today, and that's how we can protect our smaller electronics from being fried in such an event, right? You can imagine an event where a true solar flare or an EMP affects our nation and no electronics are powering up. They're not getting signal. They're not working in any regard. And so there are a few steps that we can take to protect those devices in such an event. Namely, this kind of use of Faraday bags or Faraday technology, right? So this is something that you may or may not have heard of before. Faraday cages, kind of used to isolate whatever's in that cage from the surge in energy levels that are caused by an EMP or a solar flare, right? And so it kind of helps to attenuate that signal and protect the devices that are inside. Now, Faraday cage, as you hear me say it, is probably not something that you've considered adding into your garage, right? It's not necessarily easy solution. It's something that you can build if you've got the time, the knowledge, and the equipment. However, you can purchase things like this Faraday bag from the guys at Mission Darkness. Now, this is one that I really wanted to bring to the channel, and it just so happened that recent events have kind of put this up in the timeline of video outputs. But this is a Faraday dry bag, right? And it's maybe 8 by 10 or something of the sort, right? But I find that this is a pretty good solution for protecting some of my more delicate electronics, right? And you'll see it's got Molly on the back. It does have a fully sealed watertight zipper. And on the inside, again, in keeping with the fact that it's a dry bag, it does kind of roll up, and you can unroll that bag and store your electronics on the inside. So I'll try to roll in some B-roll footage, but what you've got on the inside is kind of this metallic fabric, and I'll see if I can roll some details on what this is exactly made of up on the screen. But essentially, right, this is your Faraday cage or your Faraday material. And by rolling this bag up and creating a seal, we're able to prevent waves from entering and exiting the bag. So what you'll find is a lot of professionals, namely in law enforcement, will use bags like this to isolate electronics that they may seize during a raid or something like that, and they don't want the party or the organized crime syndicate or what have you to be able to remotely access the device and wipe it, right? You can drop it in a bag like this, seal it up, and it's going to be fully protected and shielded from outside communication. Now with that, of course, it's useful to be able to kind of drop off the grid, cut out your GPS or your cell signal, and that has its own set of use cases and implications, right? And as free citizens, I'll allow you to explore that at your leisure. However, it does also serve a major role in protecting against those really high spikes in electromagnetic radiation that are caused by an EMP or solar flare. And so this bag is one that I've been meaning to bring to the channel for quite a while because it is one that I use to store my NODs. Now, this is going to be the first cameo of this unit on the channel, so stand by for more content. As I mentioned previously, right, I am going to be doing quite a bit more NODs content here this year. But you can see, right, I keep my AR and VGs isolated in this bag. Now, why is that? Well, aside from the fact that these are a very expensive set of equipment, and certainly a very valuable piece of technology that would be certainly even more valuable in a grid down situation where most other electronics that weren't shielded in a bag like this have been fried and will no longer be coming back online, at least for the foreseeable future. So this is something that I certainly wanted to protect, primarily for my financial investment, but also just in the sense of being a prepared citizen. This is something I would probably want to isolate from potential EMPs, solar flares, etc., right? I certainly would be upset if we did have a solar flare on Thursday, and I went to try out my NODs Thursday night only to find that they weren't powering on, they weren't working. And of course, there are things that you can do to kind of help further isolate a system like this from outside waves of that nature, right? Removing the battery, making sure that there's no live circuits, nothing's plugged in. But of course, keeping it in something like this Mission Darkness Faraday bag, and I'll see if I can roll a link in the description, is of course going to protect your unit quite a bit more. And so I like to keep these stored in here, primarily to protect that investment again and to protect these NODs, right? It's a valuable piece of technology, is essentially a superpower, right? And you would want to isolate that from such bad actors that might trigger something like an EMP or a targeted cyber attack. Now, of course, the attack that we suffered this past week was more of a cyber attack, right? And so it's of course going to rely and lean on that existing infrastructure, right? And so it affected the networks that were being leveraged by the towers that they were able to attack. So something like, again, our isolated devices, night vision, whether that be small radios, etc., not really affected in this particular instance. However, this very well could have been something that fried all of our small electronics, right? Shortwave radios would be something else that you want to keep isolated in a bag like this, right? And so, of course, you can kind of go on the cheaper route. That Mission Darkness bag is probably $80 or $90. This is a small pouch that I purchased from Amazon. It's got a similar metallic fabric material, and I use this just to isolate a spare cell phone. If for whatever reason, right, the small devices are affected, but somehow the infrastructure is not, I'd like to have a fresh device that I can quickly connect to that infrastructure and get outgoing and incoming communications, right? So that's something that I like to keep. This is, again, very cheap. You can get these on Amazon. And maybe you want to drop something like your shortwave radio in here, or maybe you get a larger Faraday bag from the likes of Mission Darkness or Silent, and you can keep all of your electronics in a central location and know and rest easy in the sense that, hey, these electronics are going to be fully shielded, they're going to be fully protected. And frankly, in the case of this Mission Darkness bag or some of the offerings from the likes of Silent, you're also going to get water protection, which in my mind, EMP protection and water protection for your electronics is the holy grail of what you're looking for, right? Maybe with the exception of shock protection. That's pretty much the key or the crux of what's going to take out these devices, right? Water and those high surge electrical outputs, those EMPs, solar flares, etc., right? And so I certainly want to protect against those because, of course, shock damage in most cases is something that I can prevent, right? I can keep my units in an area that they're not going to fall and be subjected to that damage. Another thing that I wanted to mention, right, and this is something that's kind of overlooked, I think, in the community, is maybe keeping and looking into keeping things like small optics shielded and protected in a bag like this, right? All of us, well, many of us at least, right? I'm not sure who this video is found, but many of us own firearms. And as we move further into the 2020s and into the modern era, if you will, a lot of us are leaning on the use of these electro-optics, right? These battery-powered systems, sometimes to the extent that we remove our backup iron sights altogether. Now, again, that's a discussion for another time as to whether or not that is the correct methodology to take. But as a prepared citizen, right, if you are going to use these optics, or you plan to lean on the use of these optics and these devices in the event of a disaster or grid down scenario, SHTF, or world without rule of law type of scenarios, you're certainly going to want to make sure that your electronics, which you've trained with and have built a dependency on, are going to be up and running as best as you can ensure that they will. And so I think that protecting a series of small optics, whether that's just a backup red dot like this Steiner MRS, or if you've got the spare cash and you just want to buy a backup EOTech and keep it in a Faraday bag for such an event, certainly not a bad idea. Now, with all that being said, right, I think we've got to address the question of, is this really necessary, right? Do you really need to go to this extent to protect these type of devices? What's the real threat? What's the likelihood or the probability of something like this happening that we need to utilize these type of protection devices and these protective bags? You know, that's something that I'm not really able to put a number on. Now, I will say that especially as Americans, I do think that it's more likely that we face a cyber attack or an EMP type threat than it is that we face maybe like a hot conflict where we've got, you know, foreign troops landing on our shores. Now, that's certainly something that I think an EMP or a device similar to that and its ability to take down our infrastructure, I think something like that could allow and open the door for that type of boots on the ground type invasion. But aside from that, I don't think that it's a huge likelihood that we face, you know, North Korean troops landing in Florida, for example. However, I do think it's a much higher chance that we would encounter something of a cyber threat, or especially I think the one that I fear the most, and kind of the mother of this video, of course, is going to be the EMP threat. And I think cyber and EMP are probably going to be the most likely threats that we face, because you can quickly leverage those tools and abilities at the push of a button remotely from some office in Russia. And so I think that that's a much higher likelihood that we experience something of that sort. And so for that reason, right, I do think we got to do what we can right now. Unplugging from the infrastructure entirely, probably not an option, right? I would encourage folks to look into the use of things like landlines. I think that we found that in this previous cyber attack, as I'm calling it, landlines were working fine and were more or less unaffected. And so that goes to show, right, as we kind of cut away and cut off some of this old technology that we see as antiquated, right, for the use of these wireless comms and things of that nature. It's events like these that help to remind us of of some of the strengths and weaknesses between the two, right? While this is nice in the sense I can throw it in my pocket and drive across the nation and still remain connected, it is going to have to leverage and lean on that infrastructure being turned on and being connected. If that is for whatever reason interrupted, well, this becomes a fancy paperweight. And you know, we're faced to look at some of our older technologies, landlines, etc., shortwave radio, right, as part of that PACE plan to kind of to cover our ass in such an event, right? And so again, this might be a bit far-fetched for many, right? A lot of folks probably aren't even batting an eye at what happened on Thursday. However, for me, again, as a customer who was affected, but also just a prepared individual and somebody that thinks of these things a bit beyond the news headlines, I really do think that this is a threat that we're going to face more, especially as we enter further into these global conflicts, as we enter further into our own elections here domestically in the United States. Certainly a potential for a lot of these infrastructure, DDoS, cybersecurity, and God forbid EMP type of threats going forward. I think it's really going to be a lot of electronic warfare, if you will, right? From AI to EMP. I think it's kind of the name of the game in 2024, and I don't know how much kinetic weapons are going to be utilized in this oncoming conflict. God forbid that we have one, right? But all that being said, I hope that you are able to kind of take this into consideration. Maybe look into something like a Faraday bag or a Faraday dry bag like the one we see here, especially for some of your more mission critical, again, we're civilians, right? What the fuck is that? But more of your expensive critical equipment that you know that you're going to lean on in such an event. It's probably a good idea to protect something like that in a bag like this one, right? And so, with all that being said, if you found this video educational, informational, or entertaining in any way, shape, or form, I'd ask that if you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more, and please leave a comment. It really does kind of help to push the engagement and help to tell the algorithm that this is something that we're interested in, that we want to share with others. And with all that being said, I'm gone.